Awesome. Hi everyone. My name's Sam. For those that don't know me, I'm the exercise physiologist at the South Melbourne Clinic. Firstly, I just want to say thank you all for tuning in. As Katie mentioned, we've got almost 100 participants in this webinar. I think that's a huge number. Obviously, the topic is quite relevant, and I think that's why we've had such good response to this webinar. Secondly, I just want to hope everyone's safe and keeping healthy during these very uncertain times. It's very tough at the moment, so we're all in this together essentially. Why I'm doing this presentation is essentially just to get everyone to be doing a little more exercise, to be doing more effective exercise as well. So the aim of this presentation, as I said, is to make sure we're walking more effectively and have a better understanding of why we do need to be doing some strength training and complementing that walking as well. So I've reached out a lot of members during this time just to check in to see how they are going during this COVID period. And a lot of the response has been that they don't want to continue doing their strength training because they're walking more now. They're thinking that is okay, but is walking really enough? Can I get those, some people just to write to the chat box if they're walking more or if they're walking less and how much they're walking currently during this COVID period. Now, I would just like to see what the response is like and what people are currently doing. Will those come through to me for you, Katie?
Yeah, that'll come through to both of us, but I can feed them through to you. I've got a few coming through now saying they're working more.
More. Yeah, brisk walking.
Yeah.
7-8 Ks, that's good.
Walking daily.
Cool, yeah.
Nothing else to do is another comment.
Exactly right, and I think that's why this topic is so relevant, because obviously with COVID we're having to walk more to get that exercise in. So on tonight's agenda, we're going to go through the National Physical Activity Guidelines stated by the Department of Health. I've got some facts that aren't very great, they're pretty horrifying, so I want to touch on those. I want to talk about the increase in sitting time. So during this COVID period, there's a lot more people working from home. So I want to touch on why prolonged sitting is a bad thing and why we need to be changing that up. I'm also going to go through some physical activity recommendations for some common conditions. We'll go through some key take-home messages, and as Katie mentioned, we'll do a bit of a Q&A at the end. So these are the guidelines stated by the Department of Health. So in terms of the physical activity, I want to start off by saying that doing any physical activity is better than doing nothing at all, okay? We want to be physically active for most days of the week, if not all days of the week. Okay, so as it states there, we should be doing about 2.5 hours to 5 hours of moderate intensity exercise, or 1.25 to 2.5 hours of vigorous intensity physical activity each week. So we should be doing about 30 minutes per day, essentially. It also states that we need to be doing at least 2 days of strengthening exercise. I want to go one better. I want to do 3 days a week, okay? That is from the Department of Health. We might be reaching that moderate intensity exercise goal, but we're not actually getting that strength training in at the moment due to COVID. When we're talking about our sedentary behavior, we want to minimize the amount of time sitting in that prolonged state, okay? And I want to break up those long periods of sitting as often as possible. And we'll touch on that in a second. So when we look at what the exercise intensity is, okay, so we're going to be looking at, say, your low, moderate, and vigorous exercise. The easiest way to determine how hard you're working during exercise, whether that's during your strength training or during your walking or your cycling, it's what we call the talk test, okay? So as I mentioned, we've got the 3 different levels of intensity. So if we're looking at the low intensity exercise, you can talk, you can sing, you can breathe normally. So this might be doing the washing, doing ironing, something that's not going to take a whole lot of effort. When we look at the moderate intensity exercise, you can talk but not sing. And then your vigorous exercise is that you can't say more than a few words without having to take a breath. So that's more your jogging or your fast cycling. Now, I've spoken to a lot of people and they've told me that they're walking more, which is great. And then I ask them, well, how hard are you working? And their response is always, probably not hard enough. So I think this tool here is very easy to use, very effective to ensure that we are really hitting that moderate intensity of exercise, okay? I think this is going to be a really effective tool, and hopefully you guys take this away from tonight and use this during your walking. So these are just some simple examples of what different levels of exercise or different levels of intensity include. So if we're looking at our moderate intensity, this is your brisk walking and your swimming or your tennis. In terms of your vigorous exercise, against your jogging, your fast cycling, or some organised sports. Hopefully we can get back to doing some organised sports soon. Obviously a lot of the stuff isn't able to run except golf, which is not exactly vigorous exercise. We'll touch on some strength training ideas later on in the presentation. One thing I want to talk about here is that brisk walking. Okay, so if we're going to go for a leisurely stroll down around the Tan, or we're going to go around Albert Park Lake, it's probably not going to be enough to get that heart rate up to really hit that moderate intensity level there. So we do need to make sure that we are hitting that brisk walking. And as I said, that talk test is going to be really effective for being able to make sure that we hit that moderate intensity level. So with all that in mind in terms of the guidelines, these are some facts that I've come across recently. 1 in 2 Australian adults, or 55% of people, don't meet these guidelines. That's massive. Only 15% of Australian adults met both the physical activity and the strengthening guidelines. 23 of Australian adults met the strength training guidelines alone. So that's a huge portion of our nation that isn't doing enough strength training. I think in this current climate is huge. We need to be getting that number up. In Australian adults aged over 65, 69% of males and 75% of females were insufficiently active. Again, that's a massive portion of our nation that isn't doing enough training, whether that's aerobic, strength training. We need to make sure that we continue to do our exercise and have that as a part of our daily routine. And I'll get into why we need to be doing that. So in terms of why we need to sit less, okay, so we know that with people working from home a lot more now, the amount of time we're sitting throughout the day has increased. And we know that sitting too much has been linked to obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. So most Australian adults are sitting for about 9 hours per day. At the moment, it's probably a lot more than that. Okay, and this can easily get to that 15 hours a day. So if we're looking at that green wheel there, that just breaks down someone's day essentially. So they're sitting for breakfast, they're sitting down while they drive to work, they're sitting at work, they have lunch. Cycle continues, and that makes up 15 hours a day. And I think that is pretty realistic, and a lot of people are probably doing that 15 hours a day. If you look at that light blue statistic there, so if you sit for 11 hours a day, your risk of early death is 40% higher than someone who sits less than 8 hours a day. That is huge. What I'd like you guys to do, and I don't mean to do it now, but later on, I want you to actually sit there, write down how much you're sitting down, how many hours, and break it down to what activities you are doing while you're sitting down, and just find out how much time you're sitting down. And I think you'll be surprised how much you are actually sitting down during the day. So we all know that walking is good for us, okay? But why? So we know that walking increases our cardiovascular and respiratory fitness. The heart is like any other muscle in the body. It needs to be worked to become stronger. So the harder we work, the stronger our muscle, the stronger the heart is, the healthier we are. We know that it improves the management of conditions such as your hypertension and your high cholesterol. So as I mentioned, the heart gets stronger. It doesn't need to work as hard to pump the blood through our whole body, which means our blood pressure is going to be lowered. When we talk about high cholesterol, so obviously know with cholesterol can build up in the blood vessels, which can lead to your cardiovascular disease. As we exercise, as we do our walking, the amount of our high density lipoproteins, or our good cholesterols in the system, increases. And that's responsible for taking the bad cholesterol, or the low density lipoproteins, to the liver to be processed. So we know that it decreases our risk of heart disease, diabetes, and stroke. So as I just touched on in terms of the heart disease, we know that obviously lowering blood pressure, decreasing the amount of cholesterol in our system, that's going to decrease our risk of heart disease. Diabetes, as we're walking, we're using the sugars that are in our blood. The muscles are taking that up for fuel, therefore decreasing our sugars in our blood. And we know that with the hypertension that I just mentioned is the leading risk factor for stroke. So obviously if we're making the heart stronger, the blood pressure comes down, decreases our risk of a stroke there. We also know that it helps reduce body fat. So we know that walking increases our heart rate, which increases our energy expenditure, which means we're burning more calories, which eventually is going to lead to decreased fat. Okay. One important thing to note there is that we need to be in a calorie deficit for the whole day, which also means we need to take into consideration what we're eating. Okay, so we need to find out if we're in a calorie deficit or not, and that's going to help us reduce our body fat there. We also know that it increases our energy levels and improves our psychological well-being. So as we're working, our bodies, more blood's being pumped through the body, and that's carrying oxygen and nutrients to our muscles, which is going to make us feel energized. As we exercise or as we are walking, our brain also releases endorphins, or our feel-good hormones, which is going to improve our mood and our mental health. So obviously it's going to lead to improved psychological well-being. And I think boost the immune system is very relevant during today's climate. We know that as we're walking, the more white blood cells are flowing through our circulation in our body, which is responsible for fighting your infections and fighting your disease. So that's obviously a huge point to be talking about today. Now, the limitations of walking. As I mentioned, the intensity, it's generally going to be on that low side, okay? Unless we're really pushing ourselves to get to that moderate intensity. A lot of people are just going for a walk and it's a leisurely stroll around the tan or around Albert Park Lake, and it's not going to be effective enough to be getting our heart rate high enough as what it should be. We know that walking is not effective for improving our strength. It's also not effective for managing osteoporosis and osteopenia, which I'll touch on a bit later on. Walking as a sole exercise alone is not enough to be getting the best health outcomes for ourselves. Now, when we're talking about exercise intensities, I want to touch on our high intensity as well. Okay, so we know that our high intensity has been shown and been proven by a lot of research that gets the best health outcomes in terms of our cardiovascular system and our metabolic system as well. So I want to touch on this research article here. And this was looking at the difference between high intensity, so someone doing some boxing training, and some moderate intensity, just doing your brisk walking. This was a 12-week intervention. They did 4 sessions a week. Each session was 50 minutes. So both groups are doing the exact same amount of exercise. As you can see, as a result of that 12 weeks, the boxing high intensity group dropped their body fat percentage by 13%. They also decreased their waist circumference by 5%, their body mass by 4%. They improved their VO2 max, which is their respiratory function and fitness. They increased that by 17%, and their blood pressure also dropped. Now, if you look at those huge statistics and match them to the moderate intensity group, it didn't really change too much. So we can see from this study here that doing high intensity exercise is going to be much more beneficial for our health and our outcomes at the end. So we need to be thinking about incorporating some high intensity exercise into our routine as well, if we're able to reach that intensity. So why do we strength train? Okay, so it improves our posture, mobility, and balance. We know that it reduces our risk of falls and fractures. It helps us maintain our independence. So as we get older, we want to be able to cook. We want to be able to clean ourselves. We want to be able to do the activities of daily living on our own. We don't want to rely on someone else. And I think that's a really big point. We know that it helps manage blood pressure, blood sugars, and blood cholesterol. It also helps prevent and control heart disease and type 2 diabetes. It improves our bone mineral density to prevent and manage osteoporosis. It's also really important for delaying sarcopenia. So sarcopenia is the age-related decrease in your muscle mass. So a little stat there, by age 80, most people lose 20 to 40% of muscle mass from not doing enough strength training. That's like losing an arm or a leg. That is huge, and that is something that obviously strength training we can help with. And as we mentioned with the facts and the physical activity guidelines, we're probably not getting a sufficient amount of exercise in to really help that stat there. So some strength training ideas. We know that strength training is any physical activity that makes your muscles work against a weight or a force. So some simple ways that you can implement some strength training. You can use your own body weight. You can use resistance bands. You can also use some weight machines like our Kieser machines, or some household items. So go fill up an empty 2-litre bottle of milk, and then you've got a 2-kilo dumbbell. Or go grab a 2-kilo bag of rice, and you can use that for some strength training as well. So let's talk about some recommendations for some common conditions. So as an exercise physiologist, I come across a lot of different chronic conditions. I'm just going to touch on 3 today, and I think that these are the 3 that are most common that I've seen at Kieser recently. Okay. When we talk about hypertension, we want to be doing 5 to 7 days per week of aerobic exercise, and we want to be doing more than 30 minutes per day of that moderate intensity. Obviously, if we're doing some high intensity, we only need to be doing that 15 minutes there. It also states we should be doing resistance training 2 to 3 times per week as well. And that's focusing on the large muscle groups. So we know with the aerobic training, making the heart stronger, decreasing the blood pressure, that's obviously going to help there. With the resistance training, that's also going to elicit the same response. So it's making the heart work stronger. But it also, over time, is going to make the peripheral blood vessels more elastic and adaptable, which means the blood flow is going to flow more easily through to those peripheral muscles, and in time it's going to decrease your overall blood pressure there. So it's really important that we be doing both aerobic and resistance training, not just your aerobic training for your hypertension. So in terms of the diabetes, okay, it suggests that we should be doing 3 to 7 days per week of aerobic exercise. Okay, so 150 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous intensity. It also suggests that we should be doing resistance training a minimum of 2 days, preferably 3, okay, of non-consecutive days per week of that moderate to vigorous intensity exercise. We also want to be focusing on our large muscle groups. So there's been a lot of research behind this, and it suggests that doing a combination of both aerobic training and your resistance training has been shown to be the best in terms of improving your insulin sensitivity and your glucose control. So strength training there helps to absorb more glucose from the blood. Okay, so if we're focusing on using our large muscle groups, that's a lot of the glucose that's being used for fuel for those muscles, and we need to replenish that with the sugars from the blood. So obviously if we're using large muscle groups, burning more glucose, we have to then take it from the blood to lower the blood sugar levels there. We know that strength training increases lean muscle mass. So if we're increasing our lean muscle mass, that's increasing our metabolic rate. By increasing our metabolic rate, that burns more calories, and that's going to help keep the sugar levels in check. It also increases the glucose storage in muscle. So if we're getting stronger and our lean muscle mass, or our muscle mass in general, is growing, that means there's more storage space for the glucose to be in the muscles rather than in the bloodstream. Therefore, we're going to lower our blood sugar levels there. And also improves insulin sensitivity. Now, this usually declines after the 48 hours after our training session, which is why we suggest not to train 2 days in a row for this population. So it's really a key point there that with diabetes, we shouldn't just be doing aerobic. We really need to be focused on doing both aerobic and resistance training there. Okay. Now, osteoporosis. This is one population group that I'm very passionate about helping. My mum's got osteopenia. She's had 2 falls in the last 12 months, and she's fractured both wrists. And I am constantly on her case about trying to do exercise, trying to do some strength training, adding in some balance stuff. And she's like, you know what, I'm just walking. I'm like, okay, doesn't get the picture. Anyway, with osteoporosis, we know that our bones are frail and they're susceptible to fractures. So our bones are in a constant state of change, which is what we call the bone remodeling cycle. So it's 2 processes, bone loss and bone formation, okay? Which is similar in the little diagram you can see down the bottom right. So in a healthy population, or where it says that normal bone, we've got the osteoclast there chipping away, but we've also got the osteoblast putting in the same amount that it's chipping away. So essentially, the bone loss and the bone formation is equal, therefore our bone mineral density stays the same. When we're in the osteoporosis, so that bone formation activity is actually decreased due to different factors. which means we're then going to be at a net loss. So you can see the little osteoclast down the bottom right with the TNT ready to blow that brick wall up. The osteoclast isn't going to be able to keep up with that to make sure that we've got the same bone mineral density. It's going to put it into the net loss, which means we're going to be in that osteoporosis range, more susceptible to fractures. The guidelines state that we should be doing aerobic training 4 to 5 times a week, okay, of moderate intensity, doing weight-bearing exercise. So doing your swimming and that sort of thing isn't going to be effective with osteoporosis. We need to be doing some weight-bearing exercise. It also states we should be doing 2 to 3 times a week of resistance training at a high intensity for those that can tolerate it. I think that's the most important factor there. We know when we do our strength training, that places enough force or enough stress on the muscle and the tendons that's going to have an impact on the bones and generate this bone formation activity. So we're then going to be obviously bringing that net loss a little bit higher and hopefully keep that bone mineral density the same. Okay. It says there that weight-bearing aerobic exercise in combination with high impact, high intensity resistance training is the best choice. And I think that's the big key thing to take from that slide. So I'm going to send this to my mum straight away, make sure she reads it and make sure she does her strength training there. Okay, so how can you help yourself? Based with in line with the current government guidelines, Kieser is still able to run our one-to-one assisted training sessions. We're able to run exercise physiology and our physiotherapy sessions. Your EP and physiotherapists are also able to create a home exercise program that's individualized to yourself. Okay, we're taking consideration of your goals and that sort of thing and what you've got available at home. And we can implement this program. You can do it at home if you're not comfortable coming to the clinic, just to make sure that we are getting enough exercise and we're meeting those guidelines that we really should be. We're also able to do objective assessments. So we're able to assess your cardiorespiratory fitness through a VO2 peak test, okay? And that gives us an indication of what your risk is for some of these cardiac conditions, that sort of thing. That's just one example. So if you are interested in kind of figuring out or finding out what your risk is or what your respiratory fitness is like at the moment, we can certainly assess that. We also run some group classes. So we run a diabetes class, we run a cardiac class, and we run an osteoporosis class. We also run some balance in the cancer class, but I think those 3 are the main ones that I wanted to touch on today, just in line with what we've spoken about today. So just some simple key take-home messages from today. We know that COVID-19 has led to more walking and less strength training. Okay? Walking is a great form of exercise, don't get me wrong, but it does have its limitations. So I want you to think about and ask yourself, are you walking at the correct intensity? And that's where we're going to use that talk test. Next time you're out on a walk, see if you can walk a little bit faster, see if you can walk a little bit further and keep that heart rate up nice and high. We touch on the importance of reducing the sitting time. So working from home, if we can get up, set a reminder on our phone for every 45 to an hour, get up, walk around, stretch. That's one simple way that we can reduce our sitting time there. With the recommendations, we know that a combination of both aerobic and resistance training is the best practice for the healthy population, as well as those with these common chronic conditions. Okay, so you might be walking more, but if you're not doing some strength training, we need to talk. Let's get you and meeting those guidelines there. Walking for osteoporosis is not effective enough, so we really need to be doing that strength training as well. And again, that's something I'm going to talk to my mum about. And we're here to help. So I believe my email was on the first slide. I will put it on again. We're here to help. Please send through any questions you have, or if you want any advice, please ask me any questions. As I said, we're here to help. Before I open up the floor to some questions, one of my clients emailed me last week and mentioned he couldn't be in this webinar, unfortunately, but he sent me through this question, and I think it was a good one to raise to everyone here. He asked, is distance walked or time spent walking more important? Now, I think they're both as important as each other, but we also need to look at that intensity, and I think that's just as important as well. So use that talk test. Figure out if you are walking at a moderate intensity or if you're not walking fast enough, just to make sure that we are reaching that moderate intensity for 30 minutes per day. If we're doing that, I'm happy. We also need to add in that strength training there. So, Katie, have there been any questions that have come through at all?
Yeah, we've got a few coming through here, Sam. So one from Ingrid. Does gardening count as strength training, for example, digging holes, carting mulch around, etc.?
It comes under your exercise. I wouldn't say it comes under some structured resistance training, and that's what we need to be focusing on, is that structured resistance training. Obviously, it's quite taxing and it's quite challenging to be doing the gardening, but I think we need to be looking at doing some more structured strength training.
Great. We've got a question here from Melanie, and she's interested to know where I can buy home gym equipment in the South Melbourne area.
You can buy them from anywhere, really. Like, I mean, like, is there a Kmart or a Big W in South Melbourne? You can literally buy them from anywhere. Not too sure specific for South Melbourne. James, do you have any idea?
I actually don't, and we've just been going online for any recommendations. Just going online to people. I think I think a lot of companies have run out of stock as well during this time. But I still think just persevere with the online stuff. There'll be probably someone on this chat that will know where they can get strength equipment from. But as you said, household goods are just as good as well. 2 kilogram bag of rice, a 5 kilogram bag of rice, that sort of thing is absolutely fine. Or go to the DFO, which is what Messina just said. So thank you very much.
I believe Audi also sometimes have some gym equipment as well. So might be worth checking Audi. They've got everything there. So why not gym equipment?
Great. We've got a question here from Sandy. Is sitting on my Fitball and rolling left, right, round okay and better than just sitting?
So it's good for your mobility and is working your core muscles there. So that is good. I would prefer you doing that rather than just sitting on a chair, where we know that our muscles are going to switch off completely. So that's really good, Sandy. Thanks for the question. So keep using your Fitball.
I've got a question here from Claire. Is yoga considered strength training?
It is. It's really good for your core strength and obviously lower limb strength. So yes, I would suggest it is a strength training exercise. Absolutely.
Claire's got another question here. Is there anything you can do while walking to combine with strength training? For example, carrying small weights?
So I actually had this question sent through to me last week as well. In terms of some dumbbells and some ankle weights, they can cause some muscular imbalances when you are walking. We know with some ankle weights, you're going to be using more quadriceps rather than your hamstrings. So it's causing that imbalance there. It can also place a bit of stress on some ligaments. So I'm not a huge fan of the ankle weights or the kind of the dumbbells. You can also use like a weighted vest. And essentially the way that the weighted vest works is it's going to increase the amount of calories you're expending, essentially. So it's not necessarily for strength training. It's more just to make you work harder. There was a research article in 2013 that looked at walking by yourself, walking with 10% of your body weight and walking with 15% of your body weight. They showed in terms of the calorie expenditure, there was a little bit more of an increase in the 10% and the 15% group, but it wasn't significant enough to warrant doing it. I think there's other ways that we can be expending energy more. So it's not technically going to be a strength training kind of exercise, adding weight to your walking.
Great. We've got a question here from Bill. Should we be running up and down stairs at home?
Yes, it's a really good way, and you can use that as a high intensity exercise. You're going to find if you're walking or even running up and down the stairs, provided it's safe to do so, that's a really good way to improve your cardiorespiratory fitness, get that heart rate up, and get that heart working as hard as possible to make it as healthy as possible. So awesome, Bill. Good idea.
We've got a question here from Melinda. Is 2 times 15 minutes of walking as effective as 1 times 30 minutes of walking?
So it's essentially, if you can find that you're walking a bit harder in that in those 2 lots of 15 minutes, that's great. But it's around that timing. If we're reaching that 30 minutes a day, doesn't matter if you break it down to 3 10-minute lots, 2 15-minute lots. It's a good goal to be getting into that 30 minutes.
Great. We've got a question here from Rick. Are there any tricks you can use to walk faster?
Get stronger.
Great question, Rick. As a physio, I would have said heel strike, so getting your heel down, really concentrating on your heel strike. And as you get that heel strike, concentrating on pushing through with some glute activity, you should find that you walk faster there. Longer strides, essentially. That's what you'll get when you really concentrate on that heel strike. That should, but for what Sam's talking about and what Sam's message is for walking, at least, is it's all about intensity, right? Not even about walking faster. I read a great research for intensity, necessarily about someone's physical time or speed that they walked at. It was how puffed that they felt during that walk led to a better mortality rate. So how far, how intense you walk led to you living longer. That's essentially what it came down to. So really, really interesting stuff around walking.
Great. So we've got a question here from Jennifer. Are all the exercises on the Kieser app training at home suitable for everyone?
It'd be very individualized. So it'd be very much, so the way that we program or do our program for yourself, it is individualized. So we would look at, if you are required to do the B1, then the home program on the app is going to be correlating to what your program is at home. So it won't be, it's not like one size fits all. Our program is individualized to yourself. So the home program app that you've got there is based off of what your program is for the in-clinic training. And
I think it's probably worth noting that, for anyone in here that's using the app, and I know at least Melinda's also app in the garden, I've heard. If you've questions, or if clarification, or if the program's not good enough or is too hard, please Physio EP. We're more happy to help. As Sam said at the start, it's about making sure everyone's been through this period in the best way possible.
Great. And just another quick follow-up question from Jennifer. Are these at-home Kieser exercises considered strength training?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
So, yep.
No, sorry, you keep going.
Yeah, so definitely they're considered your strength training. You can also, you can tweak them a little bit to make them more of a high intensity workout as well to get that cardiorespiratory rate up and the fitness up. But definitely, yeah, they are your strength training.
Great. We've got a question here from Angela. My hips and knees get sore with lots of walking. I love it, but should I walk less or more?
We're going to have to look at increasing the strength through your glutes, your hamstrings, and your quads as well, and your calves. So if we're increasing those three things, it's going to help take the load off the hips and the knee joints themselves. So I think we should look at kind of what the loading is that you are doing in terms of your walking. Are you walking too much? That sort of thing. But we should look at increasing your strength in your glutes, your hamstrings, and your quads there.
Great. We've got one from Margot here as well. Can you talk about breathing in the mask, please, while walking?
Okay. It's obviously a very difficult topic at the moment in terms of the breathing while walking. Obviously, if we're doing quite high intensity exercise or strenuous exercise, you don't necessarily need to wear them. But when we're doing our walking, I've found myself, it hasn't had too much of an effect on my walking. I mean, it's a little bit annoying, but it's definitely better than the alternative. But it's not going to affect the amount of oxygen or anything that you're breathing in at that point.
Great. We've got a question here from Ingrid. Is cycling as good as walking?
It depends on your goals, essentially. You can get the heart rate up more if you are cycling. You can get that into the high intensity. So if you're doing that, then essentially it's going to be better for you than just doing your low intensity or your moderate intensity walking. But it's certainly all about your goals.
Great. We've got a question here from Marg. What's the difference between high intensity walking and walking fast? Is walking fast not intense?
So then it comes down to just use that talk test. If you find that if you're walking fast, that can be a continuous exercise. So if you're walking fast the whole time, whereas when you're doing high intensity, you might be walking like at a rapid pace for a minute, and then the next minute you're dropping that intensity down and you're walking a little bit slower. And that's what we're talking about in terms of the intensity. So it's a tough period followed by a kind of more of a resting period, and then repeating that cycle.
Great. We've got a suggestion here from Sandy in regards to getting gym equipment. She said EMP Industrial is a great place to look. It's in High Street in Malvern. You can click and collect or have items delivered. She also suggested you can have your physio get some TheraBands for you as well if you need those.
Yeah, we're totally happy to do that. That's great. You know, there's a lot of people in this group that maybe it's also a risk or perceived at the moment coming into the clinic. So whatever we can do to help people exercise, so please get in contact with your EP or physio.
Thanks very much, Sandy.
Great. We've got another question here from Bill. What is a good exercise at home for strengthening the lower back?
The lower back. So you can look at doing some your sit to stands is really good because that's obviously going to be strengthening up your whole lower limb, which is going to help support the back. You can look at doing some core strengthening as well. It's going to help take off the load of the lower back itself. You can do some sort of some Supermans and some your bird dog. That sort of thing is really good for improving your lower back strength there. Do you have anything to add there, James? Is there anything that your go-to?
My go-to is lumbar extensions over a gym ball, or so lying on your front on a gym ball and extending your back. Lying on your front, so lying flat on your front, which is the one that's on the Kieser app as well. So if you check out the Kieser app, the home program, you'll be able to see that one where you're lying on your front and you're trying to use your back extensors. With the gym ball one, you can do that over like the arm of a chair or something, or even over a stool. That's pretty easy to do. I think, again, like Bill and to anyone else, I'll just point you to just get in contact with your physio. If you can't get in, then that's fine. With the back stuff, that the Kieser machines particularly are just really well suited to back exercises, as I'm sure most of you know as well. So it's very hard for us to find a direct replacement for what people get at Kieser. Unlike some other machines where we can find some sort of replacements, the back's the one that's challenged in a good way.
Yeah.
Right, we have another quick question from Sandy. What's a bird dog, Sam?
So a bird dog is you're in a 4-point kneel, so you're in a
Show us. Sorry.
Do you want me to?
No,
so you're in a 4-point kneel, so you're in your hands and your knees. And then it depends on your level of function at the moment. But if you can do it, one arm reaches forward and the opposite leg is going backwards, making sure that we don't arch our back. Okay. I mean, if you Google image it, it would pop up. But if you wanted to, I'm more than happy to show you in a clinic if you need to. Yeah.
Fantastic. So that seems like that's all the questions that we've got at the minute. Just while we wait and see if there's any last minute questions that want to pop through. Is there anything else you want to touch on, Sam, before we finish up, or James?
That's just my email there for those again. If you have any questions at all, any advice you're looking for, or any more information regarding some of these conditions, please look me an email. I'm happy to have a chat anytime. Happy to take any phone calls. And just thank you all for tuning in. I think, again, we had a really good response in terms of this topic. It's very relevant. So thank you all for tuning in and taking the time. Very much appreciated.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Sam and James.
Thank you. I think because we're just a little bit, we're a bit overwhelmed with the response that we've had, we will be looking to do a few more webinars over the coming months, just as we hopefully get back to more of a reopening stage. So if there's any particular topics that anyone wants us to do, then please let us know. And trying to encourage a community within Kieser is very hard when half the people are in isolation. So anything we can do to hopefully help people and keep people fit and healthy is really what we're about.
Great, fantastic. And yes, Maxwell, this one will be available online. We'll pop it up on YouTube shortly. So thanks again, everyone, for coming along.